Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight for our session on Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life. We'll commence with the prayers. Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Sangye chodang soke chugnam la janju badu dagni kapsuchi dage jin soge peso namki drola panje sangye drupa shog. Sangye chodan soge chugnam la janju badu dagni kapsuchi dage jin soge peso namki drola panje sangye drupa shog. Sangye chodang soke chugnam la Janchu Badu Dagni Kabsuchi Dage Jinsoge Pesonamki Drola Panche Sange Drupa Shog. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well. Subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble. Like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud. So one should consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, harmful deeds, and may things buffeted by waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. And the heart of the perfection of wisdom, Sutra, are prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on a massive vulture's mountain in Rajagir, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration of the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, looked upon the very practice, the profound perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding these five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no mind, an eye element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, or path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata gate gate paragate para samgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice a profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoiced. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the worlds of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. I'm now going to recite the praise to Manjushri as recommended by His Holiness when we're giving some sort of discourse or listening to Shantideva's guide. I'm going to recite in Tibetan. Lama dangu poje tsunjam po yang la chag salo gangi lo dro dribni trindro ni ta nam da rab selwe Jini den kun gi jin ji chi ni ki tu ka le bam zin. Gang dag si pe tsun ra ma ri mun tum dug nao gi chi wei. Dro tso kun la bu chi ta tse yen lag drug chu yang den sung. Drug ta che drog nyong mong ni long le ki chag dro tse shing. Mari mun sel dug nel nu gu chi ni che tse rel dri nam. Dune dai shing sa chu ta tsun yun ten lu tso gel tse tu oku. Chu tra che dang chu ni gen tre dag loi mun sel jam pel yang la du. Oma rabatana di 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 di. Seiden kuki ken rabu tsegi. Dagloi mi tu mug mun parab sel ne. Kadang ten che jung lu to pa yi. Lo dru po pe nang we sel du so. And the mandala. Sashi Poki Jushing Me To Tram Ri Rabling Ji Ni Degen Padi Sangye Jingdu Mi Te Ua Ki Dro Kunam Dag Jing La Cho Pa Shuk Dagi Chadang Mong Sum Kepe Yudranyen Basum Ludang Long Che Pang Pa Mi Pa Bugi Leje Ne Du Sum Rang Sa Dro O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I'm going to introduce tonight's session with a passage from Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which cuts very directly to our topic of not only purification as being presented in Shantideva's second chapter, but our need to eliminate non-virtue and to generate enormous quantities of virtue in our continuums in order to fulfill our Bodhisattva promise to benefit all other beings. So Pabonka Rinpoche says, we have not developed in our mind stream any new realizations we have not already developed. And those we have already developed are degenerating. Our sins and obscurations are responsible for this. Further, our sins will be responsible for all the unfortunate things in this and the next life. If we do not want these things to happen, we must expiate our sins. Sins here has been used as an equivalent of non-virtue or evil sometimes. You might even go there. Pabonka continues, through confession, we can purify enormous amounts of karma, the 5 heinous crimes or great sins whose results we would normally have to undergo. Also, it has been said, the heavy sins of the skillful are very slight. The slightest sin of the fool is very heavy. In other words, the determining factor is whether one is skilled or not in expiating one's sins. Brahman Shankara had killed his own mother. Angulimala killed 999 people. Ajatashatru executed his own father. Yet, after they had committed these heinous crimes, they were able to see the truth, that is, enter the path of seeing, because of their fervent confessions. With the strongest form of confession, you purify the sin to its very roots. The medium form lightens the sin. And at the very least, you prevent the sin from increasing in strength. But if you do not confess the sin at all, the sin doubles every day and small sins become very large. So in terms of our topic, we're now up to verse 27 of the second chapter, and this comes under Gyaltsab Sabje's heading, making requests to the object of confession. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to be interpolating Gyaltsab Sabje's headings for verses or sets of verses because they give us a very beneficial lead in to the intent of the verses themselves. So verse 27 reads, with folded hands I beseech the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who possess the great compassion and reside in all directions. In Gyaltsab Sabje's commentary, this verse comes under the heading making requests to the object of confession, and it indicates as such that we have actually commenced our confession. In this verse, we are beseeching the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to listen. In this sense, we're respectfully appealing for their attention. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who possess great compassion, as it says in the verse, are our ideal and practical support, because unlike worldly beings mired in samsara, they are totally impartial, spontaneously ready to help each and every one of us without question. And this is the unbelievable expanse of the embrace of their compassion. Moreover, as Shantideva indicates, they're able to do this in every realm, because the Dharmakaya, the enlightened mind, is coextensive with everything that exists. It is in this sense that they reside in all directions, and therefore can manifest spontaneously rupakayas in each and every situation, in each and every place as required. We touched upon this miraculous ability, in our presentation last week of the four kayas as one of the defining characteristics of the Mahayana Buddha refuge object. Drugpa Geltsen, in his commentary on this verse, recommends that our beseeching takes the following form, I quote, "To the complete Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who possess great compassion and reside in the 10 directions, that is, in the fields and realms of the 10 directions, north, south, east, west, the 4 intermediate directions above and below, with folded hands, I request to confess the negativities committed in the past by way of regret, as though I had ingested poison." This analogy of poison was earlier examined in last week's session in Geshe Doga's account of the general conditions for a purification process. Obviously, we are driven to beseech, and thus have arrived at this current point, as witnessed by our folded hands. This sign of deep respect is also an indication that we have fully accepted the Buddha's teachings on karma. Hence, Geshe Doga's reference to our acceptance of karma. So going for refuge in this way, in the context of the purification practice, is equivalent to a manifesto that we have absolutely taken on board the Lord Buddha's teachings on the law of cause and effect. Geshe Doga says, here confession refers to the practices that purify negativities. This need to purify negativities is based on an acceptance of karma. If someone doesn't believe in karma, then they would not see the need or relevance for engaging in any purification practices. The need to purify negativities comes about because one does not wish to experience the consequences of negativities, which are not limited to the suffering of pain. In fact, any kind of unwanted or unpleasant experience is the consequence of having amassed negativities in the past. Likewise, Geshe Doga continues, if we wish to experience pleasant circumstances, we need to take an interest in accumulating virtue. So we need to know how to accumulate virtue and how to discard and purify negativities. A keen interest in wanting to purify negativities comes from an understanding of the cause and effect sequence in the law of karma. End of quote. So the remainder of Shantideva's chapter takes the form of an intense interior monologue. By monologue, I mean it's a voicing from within ourselves, addressed outwards to the Buddha refuge objects. The first person voice is already established by Shantideva in verse 26, and he carries it unbroken right up until our arrival in the final verse of the chapter, verse 65, which significantly is also in the form of a beseeching, this time, however, to do with the power of the promise. We were beseeching the guides of the world who have listened, because we've reached the end of our confession, the end of the chapter, to now accept our promise. And the verse 65 reads, I beseech all the guides of the world to please accept my evils and wrongs, since these are not good. In future, I shall do them no more. So that's the pledge. As we make our way through the extended confession, it is as though Shantideva is ventriloquizing our thoughts. Though he is interpolating them, tipping them into our mind, as it were, he's also asking us to see them as our own. For this reason, these extraordinarily pungent verses really exhibit their great power when read aloud. In other words, they are to be seen as an integral part of our own meditation, not merely as something to read. If we're merely reading, what then would become of our application of the four powers of confessional practice? Verse 28. Through beginningless cyclic existence, in this life and in others, unknowingly I've committed evil deeds and ordered them to be done by others. Verse 29. Overwhelmed by the deception of ignorance, I rejoiced in what was to be done, but now seeing these mistakes from my heart, I declare them to the Buddhas. So Gyaltsabje places these two verses beneath the heading General Confession from the point of view of time, cause, and aspect. This heading is very important because it alerts us to the manner in which, in the context of Shantideva's verses, we are confessing without reference to actions done at a specific time from a particular cause, though it might be a general one, such as anger, or a particular aspect. This latter would involve delineating a particular subject of confession in relation to a particular object on a particular day under particular circumstances, etc. So this way of identifying a general confession according to non-specific time, non-particular cause, and non-particular aspect can also be illustrated by referring to the beginning of the general confession prayer, which we commonly recite as part of our confession of downfalls to the 35 Buddhas. And I quote the relevant passage. As you confess each of the negative actions contained in this prayer, think to yourself, you have created this negative action not just once, but countless times in this and beginningless lives, whether you remember it or not. Generate very strong regret. The stronger the regret, the stronger the purification. So you'll notice here that we're referring to negative actions, which is a generic term. By way of contrast, a specific and not a general confession would involve capturing and zeroing in upon an actual, discrete, historically performed episode, one precisely identified, in other words, in terms of specific time, cause, and aspect. An illustration. Yesterday, I insulted a Sangha member at 2:25 p.m. in the Tara Institute, Gompa. Now, you'll be glad to hear I'm speaking hypothetically, but the point is made. This is referring to an actual historical event or incident with its own individual contents and unique identity. And I would wish to confess and purify it on that very basis, as this would invoke a very closely, proportionately modelled, if you like, antidotal force. So why would we need to have both general and specific confessions, you might still ask? Well, the reason to seek purification of actual individual incidents we have performed is obvious. They carry their own unique karmic consequences and hence are destined to ripen in their own very particular, very unique, specialized way. But to be realistic, we are unlikely to be able to individually recall and regret each occurrence of non-virtue we have auto-historically generated. It would take like forever. And are we even in a position to recollect them? Thinking here of our deeds in past lifetimes. Therefore, we throw ourselves onto a general confession due to its unique encompassing feature. It allows us, in other words, to stretch outwards to contain all our non-virtues by catching them up, as it were, in large general categorizations, all acts of killing, done in all times, with all kinds of bodies, in all kinds of realms, and so forth. In samsara, since beginningless time. You get the drift. By engaging in a general confession, as Shantideva is acting out on our behalf in his second chapter, we therefore maximize the chances that nothing will be left out, unregretted, and unpurified. So this utilization of deliberately broad categories, such as those pertaining to sets of vows or groups of objects or according to an afflicted attitude, is clearly evidenced in the text of the Confession of Downfalls to the 35 Buddhas. And I'll quote, "I who am named," say your name, "circling in psychic existence from beginningless time until the present, overpowered by delusions such as detachment, hatred, and ignorance, by means of my body, speech, and mind, have committed the 10 non-virtuous actions, committed the 5 heavy negative actions without break, and committed the 5 nearing heavy actions without break. I've transgressed the vows of individual liberation, transgressed the vows of bodhisattvas, and transgressed the vows of secret mantra. I've been disrespectful to my parents, disrespectful to my Vajra masters and my abbot, and disrespectful to my spiritual friends living in ordination. I have committed actions harmful to the 3 rare sublime ones, abandoned the holy Dharma, criticized the Arya Sangha, harmed sentient beings, and so on. These and many other non-virtuous actions I have done have caused others to do, have rejoiced in others doing, and so forth. In the presence of the great Guru Vajradhara, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who abide in the 10 directions, and the Venerable Sangha, I admit the entire collection of faults and transgressions that are obstacles to my own higher rebirth and liberation and causes of cyclic existence and the lower realms. I do not conceal them, and I accept them as negative. I promise to refrain from doing these actions again in the future. By confessing and acknowledging them, I will attain and abide in happiness, which, by not confessing and acknowledging them, true happiness will not come. And the mantra of pure morality is then recited. So you'll see here that the four powers are found incorporated in the body of the classical general confession. I mention this because the four powers are to be constantly kept at the forefront of our minds. You can now appreciate how the 35 Buddhas practice incorporates the same vital elements we find in Shantideva's disclosure of evil, which likewise works as a general confession. And all the four powers are likewise found embedded in Shantideva's verses. As Sabje further indicates, it is because we have circled in samsara since beginningless time that it is critical, imperative, that we learn to purify in this general way, as the truth of the matter is that I performed countless negative actions due to my ignorance and confusion with regard to the ripening result of karma. In other words, this ignorance has itself been generally operative. If there had been a specific break in the ignorance, we might have stood some chance of beginning to observe the law of cause and effect, but this didn't happen, at least until now. This is why Sabje proposes that we commence the confession with the words, "Since beginningless time, I have circled in cyclic existence. I confess all negativities in this and other lives due to being confused with regard to the ripening result of karma." This, of course, is a paraphrase of Shantideva's own verse 28. I quote, "Throughout beginningless cyclic existence, in this life and in others, unknowingly I committed evil deeds and order them to be done by others." As Geshe Doga indicates, this works according to the following delineations. Duration, since beginningless time. Cause, due to not knowing the ripening result of karma. Aspect, due to confusion or ignorance, one does not know that by engaging in virtuous actions, one will experience happy results, while by engaging in non-virtuous actions, one will experience suffering. To further explain this aspect, Geshe Doga adds, without knowing this, how could one possibly avoid creating negative karma and adopt virtue? Without that knowledge, there is no encouragement to practice in that way. So this verse is requiring us to confess not only actions we ourselves have done, but also those that we have impelled or cajoled or even forced others to do. I'm going to give an example. An officer, military officer, might order her soldiers to kill while she sits in the barracks watching television. She's watching television while they're out there killing. Though she hasn't directly engaged in the killing act on the killing field, she still bears the karma of killing. How this might become clear How it might be so becomes clear when we consider the factors that qualify a complete karmic act. They're fourfold: the intention, the object, the action itself, and the completion. Though each of these four bears its own result, if actions lack all four parts, they are weaker in strength and bring weaker results, and they're therefore more easily purified. This doesn't let us off the hook. It just means that we're going to purify those more easily. The ones that we've committed with the four factors are there in superabundance. So we have a major, massive problem still waiting. Take the example of killing. Pabonka illustrates the operation of these four factors as follows. The basis of killing is the object, and that involves another being quite distinct from ourselves that is to be killed, say a sheep. The intention has three parts: recognition, motive, and delusion. Recognition here is to recognize unmistakingly that a thing is what it is. So we don't mistake a sheep for a goat and kill a goat by mistake when we're intending to kill a sheep, for example. We've arrived at our target successfully through discrimination. The motive is wanting to kill. So in a non-virtuous act, it's clearly already poisoned by the motivation. And the delusion itself, which can involve any of the three main delusions. Pabonka adds, the deed, the action, is carrying out the killing using poison, one of the 5 types of weapons, or whatever else may be used. And he concludes, when there is a full set of these, the karmic process of killing is completed. Ordering someone to kill is no different, says Pabonka Rinpoche, from doing the killing yourself. And he quotes a treasure of metaphysics, which says, it is all one for armies, and so forth. All of them have equally done the deed. This is truly a sobering thought, particularly for those who are even small cogs in a war machine. And it does help explicate the gravity of Shantideva's line and order them to be done by others. I think we can also understand this on a psychological level. If we prove ourselves capable of ordering others to kill, then when an opportunity to kill directly ourselves using our own hands rather than our proxy hands of the other soldiers arises, we'll find ourselves able to do that with very little preparation or compunction. We kind of rehearsed it through the proxies, and we're now ready when necessary to do it ourselves. So there's a kind of psychological patterning that is being built up through our slight deferral of getting others to do it. It's not really a defense or a separation at all. So I wanted to give another example here, because these sorts of situations are very meaningful to reflect upon. And in Australia, we've had a number of we continually have episodes, but we've had a number of very highly publicised episodes of players in football teams being racially abused from the grandstands by the sports fans. And when someone shouts out what are meant to be very witty and cutting racist comments in a very, very loud voice so that others, including the player, can hear them, other members of the public join in and applaud and clap and even fire out their own abuse. So you can see here how this kind of behavior compounds and creates something very, very serious going forward. So we incur the karma of racially insulting a player if we feel some delight when we hear the abuse flying out. We think, oh, yeah, in that sort of rabid fan way. And we also, in a way, grant permission for that kind of event to occur again at the next match. So Gyaltsab Sabje's own summation of this verse is entailed in the following words. He says, I confess all negativities that I have done myself and those I have induced others to do, as well as the faults of having rejoiced in the negativities of others, due to being oppressed by the confusion of ignorance regarding the law of cause and effect. Shantideva's next verse flows organically from that. 29. Overwhelmed by the deception of ignorance, I rejoiced in what was done, but now seeing these mistakes from my heart, I declare them to the Buddhas. So we are to confess that we've rejoiced in the negative of others due to being oppressed by the ignorance of confusion. But I think this is a very interesting and challenging point. The oppressive ignorance of confusion is not really offering us a rescuing stick while drowning. It is an inadequate or even pathetic, certainly a dismal excuse. However, it does go some way towards explaining how we have arrived at indulging in such misguided rejoicing in the first instance. From this perspective, we are therefore including our ignorance as an object to be confessed. This is because it is also a form of culpability, because we have done nothing prior to now to turn it around. We should have known better. But we have kind of enjoyed not knowing, as that would subtract from the shared mass excitement, for example, of racially abusing football players. Indeed, this might be our real form of sport. So what I'm getting at here is that racism is clearly wrong and injurious, but for all sorts of twisted and weird reasons, we might indulge in it because it's a source of kind of energy that we feed upon in a very, very miserable and corrupt way, and in the process create very, very serious negative karmas. So we have a vested interest in being racist from an egotistical point of view. That's what I mean by it's a form of culpability. So regarding the third and fourth lines of this verse, but now seeing these mistakes from my heart, I declare them to the Buddhas. We indicate that we have now turned this ignorance around and are thus contrite. We do now see these mistakes as mistakes, and therefore can declare them to the Buddhas from the very depths of our heart. So we've arrived there. In other words, it is only now that we have found a basis for actually generating real regret. This is not some woolly, sentimental kind of regret based on, oh, woe is me, I've done bad things, what's going to happen now? Rather, this regret in the context of the power of regret, remorse, if you like, is very lucid, very clear, and very sane. It involves a recognition, a clear recognition that our mistakes will indeed bear significant damaging consequences. Thus, now, for the first time, now we can declare them to the Buddhas. This means, if we think about it, that once we do come to know that something we have done is wrong, there are no grounds whatsoever for not immediately declaring them to the Buddhas in a confessional mode. Why would we wait? What conceivable reason for waiting could there be? And what would be the purpose of putting our now intense regret back on the shelf in storage, as it were, for a rainy day? Damage has been done, and it is urgently imperative that we do something about it. Hence, I again invite us to consider the manner in which the four powers work as a coherent set. For example, obviously our promise or resolve, the third power, never to commit any such actions, is incumbent upon our recognition that they are indeed wrong. And, in turn, this recognition is due to the inspirational instruction and guidance of the refuge objects, without whom we would be floundering in the dark. Hence, the power of reliance as the first power in His Holiness's presentation. Likewise, if we fail to see the faults of our actions, that is, get around to identifying them as faults, regret will not arise, referring to the second power. As His Holiness mentioned, and I quoted this last week, this power of recognizing them as faults requires reflection on the harmful effects of our actions. And just as formerly I rejoiced in what was done, referring to my evil deeds, I now feel impelled to dismantle the grotesque folly of such twisted rejoicing by generating an exactly antidotal mind that, instead of rejoicing, feels profound dismay and shame. Driven by this dismay and shame, I employ fourth power, the power of the remedy, according to His Holiness's enumeration. This might involve actions such as prostrating, saying Vajrasattva mantras, Damsik Dorje mantras, doing 35 Buddhas, confession practice, etc. It is this power, and I mentioned this also last week, that constitutes the actual act of purification. So to summarize, in terms of Shantideva's extended general confession presentation thus far, we have already had demonstration of the employment of two of the four powers, the power of reliance when we took refuge and generated bodhicitta, and the power of regret when we recited the request to purify one's negativities. So what is remaining is to engage the third, the power of the remedy, and the fourth, the power of the resolution or the promise, will be engaged when we've finished reciting the mantra or whatever remedy we have chosen to employ. Again, we find this very structure in the prostration to the 35 Buddhas in terms of expressing, indeed manifesting, the power of regret. It gives a veritable litany of negative deeds. I'm just going to quote the first part. All you 35 Buddhas and others, as many Tathagatas, Arhats, perfectly completed Buddhas as there are existing, sustaining, and residing in the world systems of the 10 directions, all you Buddha Bhagawans, please pay attention to me. In this life and all states of rebirth in which I've circled in samsara, from beginningless lives, whatever negative actions I have created, made others create, or rejoiced in the creation of, whatever possessions of stupas, possessions of the Sangha, or possessions of the Sangha of the 10 directions that I have appropriated, made others appropriate, or rejoiced in the appropriation of, whichever of the 5 heavy negative actions without break that I've done, caused to be done, or rejoiced in the doing of, whichever of the 10 non-virtuous paths of actions I've engaged in, caused others to engage in, or rejoiced in the engaging of, whatever I've done being obscured by these karmas that causes me to be born as a sentient being in the hell realm, in the animal realm, or in the preta realm, in an irreligious country as a barbarian, as a long-lived God, with imperfect faculties, holding wrong views, or not being pleased with the Buddha's descent, in the presence of the Buddhas, Bhagawans, who are transcendental wisdom, who are witnesses, who are valid, and who see with omniscience, I'm admitting and confessing all these faults. I will not conceal them, and I will nor hide them. And from now on, in the future, I will abstain and refrain from committing them again. So again, you can see even at a glance that only at the end of divulging this list of negativities is the power of the promise employed. Extensive dedication prayers, which are also built into this practice, they follow actually that section, involve an extensive list, this time presenting all of our virtuous deeds performed in all the different times, in all the different places and so forth. So we make that as expansive as possible in order to provide the kind of material, if you like, to dedicate with force towards the accomplishment of the purification process and the promises we've made to go forward without engaging in the like again in the future. So it's a kind of counterbalance, karmic counterbalance to the non-virtuous deeds. That symmetry is very significant. So I mention this again to encourage us to learn to identify the 4 powers in terms of the various purification techniques. By studying Shantideva's verses, we also increase our understanding of the other confessional practices. For example, in the 35 Buddhist practices, we find the words, in the presence of the Buddha Bhagawans, who are transcendental wisdom, who are witnesses, who are valid, and who see with omniscience. These are all key elements we have already discussed in relation to the manner in which Shantideva sets up the object of reliance before proceeding with the body of the confession in his text. It is inevitable that each time we recite such a litany, new acute feelings of remorse arise, together with memories, we invoke memories of past negative deeds. This is as it should be. So it's a dynamic living experience, in other words. We're not just reciting a text. We're trying to really dredge and draw from our minds that material. And just because we can't recall killing our parents or rejoicing in someone killing another in some distant past life doesn't mean that we have not engaged in such acts. For it is the nature, the unfortunate nature of our deluded minds that we continuously foster dangerously afflicted actions in an endlessly proliferating array of forms. Why is this so? Are we, by nature, a bad or evil person? To address such difficult questions requires delving beneath the apparent surface of things, namely, how do delusions arise? How does karma manifest? Do we really understand these important but admittedly very subtle and very difficult topics? Our big challenge is to comprehend the mechanism or mechanisms by which a karmic action produced in one lifetime can produce a result, indeed multiple results, in another lifetime or across a number of lifetimes, and how a delusion such as anger might arise with such great, seemingly immediate, self-made, self-ready-made, if you like, destructive force. Where did it come from? These are like huge topics. My intention here is to simply begin to raise them as issues for further investigation. In Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha nature, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and the Venerable Thupten Trurjin, writing as co-authors, do present an incredibly incredibly lucid and vivid presentation that we can grasp. So I'm going to heavily rely on that going forward. They suggest that we can begin to research such topics by posing an apparently simple question. How can a mental factor such as anger or compassion be present in our mind streams one day, fade away, and then manifest again in the next day? The brief answer is, this is where latencies, seeds, and having ceased come in. Already things have become quite difficult, haven't they? The authors quote Chandrakirti's auto-commentary to his supplement to the Middle Way. That which pollutes the mind stream and also leaves imprints and causes the continuation of something is a latency. So I'll read that again. That which pollutes the mind stream and also leaves imprints and causes the continuation of something is a latency. Other synonyms in English for latency that we often find in the texts are predisposition, habitual tendency, imprint, and propensity. These latencies are to be considered twofold: seeds and latencies in the form of potencies. First up, often when we're reading on these subjects, we find that the word latency is being used in a general way. And in this case, it is going to be incorporating both seeds and latencies. But we need to separate them to get a clear understanding of how they work. A seed, for example, is always a latency because it has the potential to be the cause of something. But not all latencies are seeds. For this reason, His Holiness proposes that we can refer to these latencies as one of the two subsets as non-seed latencies. The term non-seed latencies implies retaining the potential or energy of something. This is to be understood in the sense that the viability of the seeds to ripen at some stage is maintained, if you like, by the non-seed latencies. If the latencies were removed, the seed could not bear its result, even if the other necessary conditions were intact. There is a further technical qualification to be made. Although the mind that gives rise to seeds and latencies may be a virtuous or a non-virtuous mind, seeds and latencies themselves, considered in themselves, if you like, are neutral. This is because, as Alex Berzin explains in a closely related account, the Buddha did not specify them to be constructive or destructive, since they can accompany any type of action, constructive, destructive, or neutral. So you might be asking, what's the point of all this, knowing all this or thinking about all this? It's because we can begin to see how seeds and afflictions are interrelated. His Holiness and Thupten Chodron explain, I quote, "Afflictions arise in our minds in a manifest and active form. We become angry, jealous, greedy, or lazy, and we act motivated by these manifest afflictions. However, even though we haven't eliminated anger from our mind streams completely, we aren't always angry. We may be sitting calmly, but when someone criticizes us, our anger is triggered and becomes manifest. What connects, the authors ask, the prior and later instances of anger? The answer, this is the function of the seed of anger. When manifest anger subsides, the seed of anger remains on our mind stream. It's carried, if you like, on the mind stream. And it's this seed that provides for the continuity of anger in our mind stream, even across those interludes, when anger itself isn't manifest. So the authors say both anger and the seed of anger are afflictive obscurations and are not abandoned until we obtain liberation or the eighth Bodhisattva ground. End of quote. So this, in rough terms, is how we maintain the continuity of an affliction, despite the obvious fact that a manifest affliction isn't always present in our minds. For example, as His Holiness and Thupten Chodron point out, two opposing mental factors cannot be simultaneously present within the space of one mind. We cannot be angry and loving at exactly the same moment, especially towards the same object, same person. When we're loving, in other words, anger is not manifest in our mind, but this doesn't mean that we have totally eliminated anger from our mind streams either. The seed of anger remains in our mind streams when love is manifest, and it connects one instant of anger to the next. So it sort of overreaches the interlude of love and then goes on its merry way, deluded way again. It's sort of unencumbered by the momentary interlude because the seed is intact and being carried throughout that entire process. This is really, really valuable to begin to think about because it explains a whole lot of behavioral issues we have. And it also explains, I'm going to get onto a little bit further, the reason for a precisely executed purification practice. Just to slightly complexify what is already a complex situation, Thupten Chodron, speaking now in her own voice, advises, quote, because seeds of afflictions remain on our mind streams, complacency is ill-advised, whereas humility brings the heedfulness necessary to stay on track in our practice. End of quote. We can also talk of innate and acquired afflictions, and both have a manifest aspect and a seed aspect. So I'm only going to touch on this very quickly. In brief, an acquired affliction is one produced or acquired independence on learnt incorrect ideas. For example, stealing is a healthy life-supporting act. The seed of such a manifest acquired affliction has the potential to give rise to accepting or embracing such an afflicted view again in the future. Consequently, we'll not only be inclined to steal in a future life, but will be magnetically drawn or to gravitate towards an ideological or conceptual system that will justify behaving in that destructive way. So this is really, really interesting, isn't it? Particularly when you look at mass political movements. Many countries are dealing with very extreme ideological movements, and they're coercing all sorts of extreme behaviors in the name of truth or nation or whatever. So these are interesting, reverberating topics. To understand the difference between a manifest innate affliction and an acquired innate affliction, we can look at the example of innate manifest attachment. The authors explain that such manifest innate attachment rises in our mind from seeing an attractive object. It is a consciousness, whereas a seed, the potential set on the mind stream from a previous moment of attachment that can produce a future moment of attachment, is always an abstract composite. It is neither a form nor a consciousness. To boil all this down, unless we take definite steps to deactivate the seeds of the afflictions, render them incapable, as it were, of bearing their ripening result, and also diffuse the latencies that maintain the potential energy of that seed to be activated when certain conditions are met, we will, without question, continue to experience the rising up of both innate and acquired afflictions in manifest form. Sometimes at what seems the very slightest provocation. Perhaps someone's merely touched us from behind on our shoulder while standing in a queue. We take umbrage to that, swing around and attack the person verbally. Where did that come from? All this has great bearing on how we're to understand what's involved in establishing an ethical practice. Returning to the example of a manifested anger having subsided, it is not the case from this Buddhist presentation that it is repressed and thus stored beneath the surface, intact but dormant, like some stored up subterranean pressure, waiting for the pressure to build until it breaks again through the crust in a volcanic eruption. This is actually a favourite Western psychological view, or rather, a psychological view with very, very deep roots in psychoanalysis and the role of repression and the unconscious and so forth. So we can't go there, but it's interesting that there's a whole psychological model that explains this idea of repression. We even hear therapists talk of the need to suppress negative emotions. From a Buddhist perspective, the seed, which is the problem, is not a consciousness. So we're not dealing with the suppression of a consciousness at all, at any stage in this account. We're dealing with the seed together with its latencies. At a glance, you can see that this is a radically different etymological model, and the therapeutic strategies must be radically divergent accordingly. I've used the word etymological deliberately. Illustrating from the example of resentment, His Holiness and Thupten Chodron offer a very useful example to gather together all the threads just introduced. They say, when we ordinary beings are not resentful, the underlying tendency for resentment still exists in our mind stream. Someone criticizing us triggers this seed or underlying tendency, and we become resentful. This is manifest resentment. If, this is the big if we leave our resentment unchecked and neglect to apply an antidote, it will increase and motivate us to say cruel words or plot to harm someone else. This is the motivating level of resentment. End of quote. So, the manifest level of resentment that arises in dependence on a complex set of circumstances is one problem to be definitely tackled as best we can, employing ethical restraint. But you can see here that we're going to make this account diverge from the Western psychological account, this very point, unless we work to purify the seeds that give rise to the afflictions, we will remain prone, given other sets of complex circumstances, to quickly regenerate or give rise again to manifest minds of resentments, and hence the whole problem perpetuates itself endlessly, as it were. This is why we must generate through meditation true cessations, as this is the only way that we can eliminate these seeds of the afflictions. So I'm just going to touch on the next point. What are latencies of the afflictions? His Holiness and Thupten Chodron explain they are predispositions, imprints or tendencies on the mind stream, subtler than the seeds of afflictions. The latencies do not give rise to manifest afflictions. They are cognitive obscurations that are possessed by all sentient beings, including arhats and pure ground bodhisattvas, who have purified their continuums of all afflictive obscurations. Moreover, latencies of self-grasping ignorance, which is innate, this has an artificial level, but the real problem is the innate one, causes the appearance of things as inherently existent to arise. This is the case even for those bodhisattvas on the three pure grounds who have realized emptiness directly. However, though things appear to them, this is the same for a bodhisattva on the path of seeing. What I'm saying is that from that point on, they'll still see things as existing inherently, but with a very, very significant difference. They will know that this mode of apparent inherent existent appearance is not the actual mode of the existence of those things whatsoever, because they have realized that they are empty, totally empty of having inherent existence as their nature. Because they are empty, they are recognized as dependent arisings. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, from the Heart Sutra, and so forth. So, how to relate this to our practice? We need, in relation to the afflictions, to engage in the three higher trainings. To cut a long story short, His Holiness and Thupten Chodron say, the higher training in ethical conduct, morality, if you like, helps us to restrain defilements before they can motivate destructive physical and verbal actions. The higher training in concentration suppresses the manifest level of the defilements, although it cannot eradicate them, because they still exist as underlying tendencies in the mind. Only an Arya's higher training in wisdom can eradicate them completely. So the reference here to an Arya's higher training in wisdom alerts us to the fact that only the beings on the path of seeing and beyond can achieve actual true cessations. This was mentioned in earlier talks in reference to the meaning of Dharma. You will recall, for example, that Geshe Doga indicated that the real Dharma refuge was true cessation. As to the latencies of the afflictions, they are only tackled by bodhisattvas on the path of the three final pure grounds. This is why, relating to an earlier topic, hearers and solitary realizers do not, upon reaching their chosen attainment, acquire the four Buddha bodies and the five primordial wisdoms. This is because they have not tackled the cognitive obscurations, which are none other than the latencies of the afflictions. Writing for a moment in our own voice again in Samsara Nirvana and Buddha Nature, the Venerable Thupten Chodron says, quote, reflection on the existence of the seeds of the afflictions keeps us humble. After working hard to subdue a particular affliction, we may think that one is taken care of. I don't need to continue working on it. End of quote. She knows us all too well. But she adds, but my, Chodron's experience, is that when we think like that and become a little smug, the affliction will once again surge up strongly when we least expect it. Because seeds of afflictions remain in our mind streams, complacency is ill-advised. whereas humility brings the heedfulness necessary to stay on track in our practice. How wonderfully well put. We are now ready, or at least a little ready, to consider another but equally important operational system that involves karmic seeds and karmic latencies. First up, we are to understand that the seeds and latencies of the afflictions are not the same as the seeds and latencies of karma. This is a very subtle and very difficult point, and confusion will reign if we don't somehow try to tease those two sets apart. Though, having said this, the respective function of seeds and latencies in relationship to their affliction or their karma are the same in relation to each other in either case. Karmas, we have to understand, are not the same thing as afflictions. His Holiness and Thupten Chodron say, the seeds and latencies of karma are the legacies of non-virtuous actions and polluted virtuous actions that have, and this is the key, have the capacity to give rise to suffering and happiness in samsara. Their fruits are ripening results, causally concordant behavioural and experiential results, and environmental results. So we encountered these earlier when our teachers, including Lama Tsongkhapa, strongly advised that our purification process proceed on the basis of a solid understanding of the law of cause and effect, particularly the fruitional results. And while not eliminated at arhatship, the point at which afflictive obscurations are eliminated, these karmic seeds, still on the mind stream of those beings, can no longer ripen because craving and clinging, the factors that stimulate their ripening, have been eradicated. So in order to appreciate this point, we need to look at the operation of the 12 links of interdependent origination, which is found in the second scope of the Lamrim. So now we need to define karma. Technically speaking, I'm using the word technically very deliberately because this is quite different from the kind of popularist street account of karma. This is a very precise definition. Technically speaking, karma is a mental factor of intention. Karma is a mental factor of intention. As a mental factor, it means that it accompanies our primary mind. This is certainly different from the rough use of karma as a term to refer to the behavioural relationship of cause and effect in general. Oh, that's karma, we say. So to distinguish it from this kind of popular parlance use or even misuse of karma, Berzin calls it an urge. And this is very useful, I think, because it captures the impulsive or forceful nature of the energy of an intention that is the mental factor, karma. As Berzin further explains, the ripened presence of this urge is that which accounts for the compulsiveness of one's behaviour. How amazingly interesting is that? So we suddenly have an idea to do something, karma as a mental factor kicks in, and we find ourselves impelled towards performing that act as though being pushed by a giant train from behind. It's as if we're being impelled forcibly. This is the aspect of karma operating in that scene. So His Holiness, and the next topic is, how does karma as intention come into the picture of the operation of the afflictions? Because we need to bring these two sets or systems together. His Holiness and Thupten Chodron say, in the context of the 10 paths of non-virtue, the three that are done with mind, covetousness, malice, and wrong views, are afflictions, so that when they cease, they leave seeds of afflictions on the mind. And now for the distinguishing crunch. The mental factor of intention, karma, that shares the same primary consciousness with those afflictions is karma. And that intention accompanying the primary mind is what leaves the seeds of destructive karma on the mind stream. On the other hand, the mental paths of virtue, non-covetousness, non-malice, and correct views, which are not just the absence of covetousness and so forth, but mental factors that are the opposite of them, leave the seeds of these mental factors when they cease, and the intentions that accompany them leave seeds of constructive karma. This is what we say, well, merit, we need merit. This is what we mean when we say we need merit. We're leaving the seeds of constructive karma on the mind stream. So it's therefore vital to not conflate the afflictions with the urge or compulsiveness that accompanies the pathways of the afflictions. Berzin stresses, it's very important not to confuse karma, the compulsiveness, with the positive and negative emotion that accompanies it. They are not the same. So the positive or negative emotion here is Berzin's translation of klesha, if you like, affliction or delusion, whatever. Berzin says there is nothing that is both a karmic urge and an affliction. Karma, he says, is like a magnet that draws us into thinking, to act, draws us into acting, and draws us in continuing the act and then stopping. And unless we do something to come out from under its compelling power, it's out of control. And he illustrates, my tendency is to yell whenever someone says something nasty about me. So that supports the feeling I have. Then there's also a grasping to a solid me. Me. You said something nasty to me, or how dare you say that to me? All those factors work together, says Berzin, when we feel like doing, saying, or thinking about something. Thinking about something could be, for instance, plotting. How can I say what can I say that's really going to hurt you? So I start to plan, conceptually devise a course of action, a pathway of action. Based on such a feeling, in accompaniment of deciding on a course of action conceptually and so forth, a mental karma arises, namely a compulsion. This compulsion is a mental urge, as we've been explaining, that draws us into thinking to act out what we had previously felt like doing. Moreover, Berzin points out, a motivating emotion and intention, we're talking about intention here as in wishing to go to a particular place. It's different from the intention that we're describing as karma. And a grasping of me all accompany this mental urge, which is the karma, to think about doing or saying something. So we have to now spell out the main problem, because we've now built up a sort of system of ingredients, if you like, that enable us for the first time to really do that. Geshe Sopa says, you could say that the karmic seeds, the potentials you bring with you into this life, are like the fuel that feeds the birth, survival, and increase of the afflictions. So again, there's a relationship. Because all the factors of your being and of your world are associated with these karmic potentials, their natural tendency is to produce, sustain, and increase afflictions. We're dealing with negative karmic potentials here, mainly. Because all the factors that constitute existence within samsara are associated with seeds that produce, sustain, and increase the afflictions, your body-mind continuum and all the conditions of this life are unsuitable to perform in the service of virtue. Even, says Geshe Sopa, if you try to practice virtue, hindrances will arise because of these circumstances. I think we often hear people, particularly Buddhist practitioners, saying, oh, obstacle, there's an obstacle. I know in my own case, I'm planning to go to see His Holiness in Dharamsala, and I'm very wary of obstacles arising. It's often said that if you're planning to perform a really virtuous deed, like going on pilgrimage, obstacles will kick in. Karmic urges will take place, and karmic seeds will ripen, and there'll be all sorts of barriers to actually carrying out that act, even though by nature it's a virtuous intent. I think we can all relate to that, can't we? So Geshe Sopa very intriguingly proposes, therefore, that we can say that the power of an individual's karma is almost equal to the power of the Buddha's actions. Remarkable, isn't it? The power of an individual's karma is almost equal to the power of the Buddha's actions. We can put up such a bulwark, such a barrier, such an obstructive mass, if you like, that although the Buddhas are there reaching out and in perfect ways to help us at every moment, those blessings can't get through because we have so much non-virtue accumulated within us. So Geshe Sopa says, sometimes Buddhas appear in the world and teach all the practices for obtaining liberation, but the beings at that time and place do not benefit. Because of their powerful negative karma, the Buddha's actions do not affect them. Similarly, a seed will sprout if rain falls at the proper time in the proper quantity, but if the seed is burnt, dries out, or is not suitable to germinate, then it cannot grow even though it rains. Even though there's a Buddha there, you can't receive blessing. In this sense, you could say that the power of an individual's karma is almost equal to the power of the Buddha's action. So that's where that quote came from. I put it in its setting like a jewel. The one controlling the situation is the one appearing first. So here it's my delusions appearing first because there's been nothing to stop them. For example, if you have created strong negative karma that ripens before you meet the Buddha, that karma will determine your experience. Once that karma ripens, there is no way to reverse its effects. When you are born as an animal or a hell being, you are like a burnt seed. This is to be contrasted with Aryas, those who have realized emptiness directly. For those Aryas who have gained direct insight into the nature of reality, they will still take rebirth in cyclic existence until they attain arhatship, at which point they completely eliminate their obscuring afflictions. For arhats, although they have accumulated many, many karmic seeds in past lifetimes, these seeds become incapable of producing another samsaric rebirth for them because the primary conditions for them to ripen, the afflictions, have been completely eliminated. So we're now arriving at the conclusion. It is possible to weaken and deactivate these karmic seeds and thereby sever their potential to ripen in the three ways within samsara. So I'm going to now quote a very beautiful and meaningful classic analogy in the words of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In the case of purifying non-virtue, when we ordinary beings apply the four opponent powers, we impede the ripening of seeds of destructive karma by diminishing, reducing, or completely consuming their potency. Depending on the strength of the four opponent powers, the potency of the seed may decrease, or the coming together of the cooperative condition for the seed's ripening may be delayed. If purification is strong, the potency of the seeds, their negativity, is disabled. Although these deactivated seeds remain on the mind stream like burnt rice seeds that remain in the ground. The seed is there, but it cannot bear its result, even if suitable conditions such as water and sun and fertilizer and so forth occur. Purification by means of wisdom directly realizing emptiness, which begins with the path of seeing, is the most powerful purification. It thoroughly destroys the seeds of non-virtue. So I just want to have a little interlude here. One of the reasons, amongst the reasons why we're practicing purification, is to eliminate enough of the seeds of the afflictions and of our negative karma to begin to have the scope to penetrate the meaning of emptiness in order to carry out this much more expansive purpose. If we're completely weighted down by delusions and heavy negative karma, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche often says, we don't even hear the word emptiness. And if we do, it won't have any special meaning. We'll just go in one ear and out the other. It takes incredible accumulation of virtue and incredible amounts of purification to really begin to explore the nature of reality in this very precise way. So Geshe Sopa says, we can see that confession, remorse, restraint, resolve, referring to the four powers, and the practice of the countervailing meritorious practices weaken the capacity of non-virtuous karmic seeds to bear their results. Once karma has been damaged by these antidotes, it will not be able to bear fruit. even if it meets the necessary conditions. This is the same as what happens when you plant a seed in the ground. If the seed rots, is burnt, or eaten by birds, then no matter how much water, fertilizer, or sunlight there is, a sprout will not be produced. So you can see this is another variation, another way of putting forward that incredible image to show the power of purification practice. Therefore, we can now appreciate that if we don't, for whatever peculiar or perverse reason, get around to purifying when the appropriate causes and conditions for doing so are assembled, and these we have somehow currently amazingly assembled, then without question, various powerful karmic seeds will ripen to drive us without choice towards suffering, along with the role of the ripening seeds of the afflictions. In this utterly compulsive manner, we will find ourselves spinning within a vortex, a samsaric whirlpool, as it were, of suffering, with little hope of escape, even if we protest and desperately wave our arms around for help. This is why Tsongkhapa very forcefully asks us to gather the force of the favourable conditions and to aspire to generate the power of virtue, the root of which is, quote, constant meditation on karma's fruitional effects. This line is a quote directly from Shantideva's 7th chapter, verse 40. The Mighty One himself has said that aspiration is the root of every facet of virtue. Its root is constant acquaintance with the ripening effects of actions. And then Tsongkhapa elaborates on that. Once you aspire to the Mahayana, you enter its door through a commitment to clear away all faults and achieve all good qualities for yourself and others. You must exhort yourself thinking, I will have to meditate for many eons to purify myself of every single fault, along with its latent propensity. See how these terms are now meaning something because we've explored some little bit of their explanation. I will have to meditate for many eons to purify myself of every single fault, along with its latent propensity, and to develop every single good quality to its fullest extent. Yet, since I do not have even a fraction of the joyous perseverance needed to clear away faults and to accomplish good qualities, I have pointlessly wasted my leisure. This is referring to us. Tsongkhapa then quotes more extensively from the 7th chapter, so verses 33 to 36, and I'm going to use the translation found in the great treatise. I will destroy the immeasurable faults of myself and others. To destroy each fault will take an ocean of eons, but I cannot see in myself even a fraction of the effort needed to terminate a fault. I am a source of measureless suffering. Why does my heart not break? I will accomplish numerous good qualities for myself and others. To cultivate each good quality requires an ocean of eons. But I have never conditioned myself to even a mere fraction of a good quality. Somehow I have obtained this life. It is appalling to waste it. End of quote. End of Shantideva quote. Hence, Tsongkhapa calls upon us to develop the power of steadfastness. But there is hope. I'm going to finish on this note. This hope is in the form none other than the four opponent powers. As Geshe Sopa indicates, the application of the antidotes, such as the integrated set of the four opponent powers, does indeed have the capacity to purify even powerful negative karma. He gives an analogy of heat to illustrate. Non-virtuous karmic seeds are the antidotes. Non-virtuous karmic seeds are to the antidotes as water is to heat. As water gets closer and more exposed to the source of heat, it gradually evaporates and diminishes. That is the nature of water, to diminish in proportion to the exposure to the source of heat. Like that, the nature of non-virtuous karmic seeds is to diminish in proportion to their exposure to correct antidotes like the four powers. Whatever has that nature can be completely eliminated. If you apply enough heat, water can be completely evaporated. If you apply the antidotes with sufficient tendency for a long period of time, long enough period of time, the seeds of non-virtue can be totally expunged. That is their nature. As Geshe Sopa indicates, a similar example is given in Hari Bhadra's long explanation of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in 8,000 stanzas, lines. Quote, thus, whatever has the nature of diminishing when it is brought into the proximity of the antidotes can be permanently extinguished by the antidotes. An example of this is the tarnish on gold. According to this logic, downfalls that occur out of arrogance, even such powerful negative actions as wrong view, which are obstructions to the holy Dharma, can be utterly extinguished. You should understand such statements from scripture as no karma at all will be lost, even in 100 eons, as referring to karma for which the antidotes have not yet been cultivated. If that were not the case, it would contradict reason and contradict many sutras. And you should understand the statement that there is no karma that will, there is karma that will definitely be experienced, is also referring to karma for which you have not cultivated the antidotes. Karma that is not definite should be distinguished as karma that only sometimes yields results, even when you have not cultivated any antidotes. So we're now going to bring together, sort of perfect synthesis. It's not my synthesis. It's not mine. It's there in the teachings, between the fourfold results of karma related to the purifying capacity of the four powers of purification. And I'm basing this on Geshe Doga's commentary to Bodhisattva. Geshe Doga says, some words on karma are relevant in this context. Every complete karmic action has a fourfold result. First of all, there is the fruitional result. Secondly, the result corresponding or similar to the cause in terms of conduct or behaviour. We might call this action similar to the cause. Thirdly, the result corresponding to the cause in terms of experience. This might be called effects similar to the cause. Fourthly, there is the environmental result. Let's pursue a little further. The fruitional result refers to the body that is actually being taken. For example, the fruitional effect of non-virtuous karma will be obtaining a body of one of the three lower rebirths. For example, the body of a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal. The fruitional body of virtuous karma, on the other hand, would be a body in a higher rebirth, such as a god or human. This is a good bit, a really good bit. Of the four powers, the power of reliance, which is refuge and bodhicitta, purifies the fruitional effect. This becomes apparent when we consider that one of the benefits of going for refuge is not being reborn in the lower realms. Regarding the effects of the cause, I have mentioned two. This is Geshe Doga talking. The experience related to the cause and the actions related to the cause. The effect of the experience similar to the cause is purified through the thorough application of the antidote, power of the antidote. An example of experience similar to the cause would be having a shortened lifespan. If one kills another person, for example, the experience similar to the cause has this result. That person we killed might otherwise have lived another 70 years, but because we killed them, their lives ended when they were just 20. As a consequence, in a future life, our karma of killing that person will result in the experience of the cause in the form of our own life being similarly cut short, prematurely terminated. The different kinds of karmic experience can be prevented by engaging in the practice of virtue. For example, on a physical level, if one looks after one's body, eats healthy food and so forth, then one will have good physical health. In similar fashion, if one looks well after one's karma, one can prevent all these future arising sufferings. Regarding the actions similar to the cause, these are purified by the power of regret. Actions similar to the cause refers to those actions that we are likely to perform again in the future. In other words, we're habitually inclined towards them. Regarding environmental results, these are purified by the power of the promise. So to summarize, the power of reliance purifies the fruitional effect. The power of the antidote purifies the effect of the experience similar to the cause. The power of repudiation or regret counteracts the actions, the behavior similar to the cause. And the power of the promise purifies the environmental result. So we'll actually finish there. I've presented quite a lot of dense material, but as we move forward through the text, we'll find continual sort of internal reverberations of these themes and topics. And because we've sort of spent this time trying to establish a sort of bit of a basis for understanding, I think it will be very beneficial for the way in which the commentary can unfold. And when I say commentary, it's going to be my commentary based on all the other perfect commentaries of my precious teachers. All I'm attempting to do is to draw them into a form that I can communicate as best I can in my own humble way. So on that note, we'll recite the dedication prayers. And it's not accidental that I've selected some of Shantideva's own dedication prayers from the famous dedication chapter. And this first prayer is a prayer that His Holiness makes every day. And he asks us as his students to make this same prayer every day. 55. For as long as space endures, for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of all living beings ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honoured and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has risen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in 3 realms. In the long life prayers to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. And for Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honouring the 3 jewels, Saviour of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And to Tenzin Osalhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request, O Lama, please, please live long. The Venerable Geshe Losang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. And the long life prayer for Geshe Thupten Sherab, who's currently in Australia. Beloved teacher leading your students towards wisdom and compassion, the steps of the graduated path, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path. You are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. And I'll recite just a few of the multiplying mantras. Chomdinde, Deshi Chempa Dra, Chompa Yang, Dapa Sok Pe Sange, Nampa Nangze, Oki Gelpola Chag Selo. Jangchu Sempa Sempa Chempo Kuntu Zangpola Chag Selo. Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha. Duru Duru Jayamuki Soha. Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha. Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Soha. Tayata Panchagriya Avabadani Swaha. Om Duru Duru Jaya Mukhi Swaha. Thank you very much.